Hello, folks in the audience and at home. We're waiting just a few moments to get our technology sorted out. Thank you for your patience. I think just a couple more minutes while we're waiting for our translation services to come online. Okay, thank you.
Joey, we'd like to do a mic check. Could you please unmute?
Good morning.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Councilmember Schwedhelm?
Yep, I'm here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We're waiting for the interpreters. I apologize for the delay. Good morning, Ted. We'd like to do a mic check. Oh, Kevin, pardon me. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning.
Can you unmute?
I'm unmuted, thank you.
Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Thank you again for your patience. Estamos esperando por la traductora. Tenemos problemas con la tecnología. We're having little problems with our technology. I apologize for the wait.
Thank you for your patience. The translator's logged on and we'll start the meeting shortly.
Hi, Charles. Thanks for joining us. Can we do a brief mic check, please? Hi, Charles. Are you able to hear me?
Good morning. Check 1, 2. This is Charles, Spanish interpreter.
Thank you, Charles. We can hear you.
Wonderful. Are we ready to roll? All right. Once again, thank you so much for your patience. I'd like to call this June 15 meeting of the Public Safety Subcommittee meeting to order. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Subcommittee Member Schwedhelm?
Here.
Subcommittee Member Rogers? Present. And Subcommittee Chair Fleming?
Here. As a reminder, if you're calling in from a telephone and choose to speak during public comment portion of today's agenda, for privacy concerns, the host will be renaming your viewable phone to resident and the last 4 digits of your phone number. The City of Santa Rosa is committed to creating a safe and inclusive environment free from disruption. We will not tolerate any hateful speech or actions and are well staffed to monitor that everyone is participating respectfully or will be removed. If necessary, we'll also immediately end this meeting. Madam Clerk, would you please explain how public comments will be heard at today's meeting?
After each agenda item is presented, the chair will ask for the committee comments and then open it up for public comment. The host in Zoom will be lowering all hands until public comment is open for the agenda item. Once the chair has called for public comment, the chair will announce for the public to raise their hand if they wish to speak on the specific agenda item. If you are calling in to listen to the meeting audibly, you can dial *9 to raise your hand. The chair will then call on the public who have raised their hands. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes, and a timer will appear on the screen for the committee and the public to see. Once all live public comments have been heard, the meeting host will play voicemail public comments. If you provide a live public comment on an agenda item, but also submitted an email or a recorded voice message public comment, your email or voice message public comment will not be duplicated, read, or played during the meeting. Throughout today's agenda, when the chair calls for public comment, an interpreter will be prepared to assist anyone needing interpretation. Those using interpreter support will be afforded additional time for your public comments as required by the Brown Act. We ask those listening on the Spanish channel but wishing to make a public comment, turn off or leave the interpretation channel entirely at the time you hear your name called, so you may join the main channel to make your public comment heard and translated into English. This icon may now look like a circle with an ES in the middle and the word Spanish underneath. You can then rejoin the Spanish channel at the conclusion of your comments to continue listening in Spanish. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll move on to item 2, announcements. Does anybody on the Public Safety Subcommittee have an announcement that they would like to share? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 3, approval of the minutes. Does anybody have any amendments or corrections to the minutes of April 20? Do we have any public comment or corrections on the minutes of April 20?
We have no public comments.
Okay, thank you. So the minutes will be approved as written. Moving on to number 4, this is a time when the public may address this body about items that are not on today's agenda. So anything that's within the scope of the Public Safety Subcommittee. Madam Clerk, do we have any pre-recorded public comment or any members waiting to make public comment?
We have no pre-recorded public comments.
Okay, and seeing nobody in the chambers move to make public comment, we will move on to item 5, new business. We'll have an update from our police chief, our interim police chief, John Cregan.
Morning, Chair Fleming and council members. I'll keep this brief today so we can get to the heart of the presentation. 2 things I wanted to make sure to update our Public Safety Subcommittee and our community members. And the first one is Assembly Bill 481, and that was the law passed in California in September of 2021 that talks about the oversight of military equipment that's either purchased or used by law enforcement agencies. So we posted on the Santa Rosa Police Department's webpage. You see it on the main page when you enter our webpage, and also on our Change for the Better page. And it talks about 3 key things. So the military equipment city ordinance, the police military policy that we have for the Santa Rosa Police Department, and an inventory of all of the equipment that follows under the qualifications of that law that we possess here at the police department. So all 3 of those are on their website. They're publicly available. But one important thing for us is we also created, and it's on the webpage, a dedicated email address if people have questions or comments about Assembly Bill 41. So it's ab41@srcity.org. And you can send in an email for that. That goes directly to our staff here who are involved with this, and we're preparing for a public presentation which we made before the Santa Rosa City Council on July 26th of this year. So look at the documents now. If there's questions, comments, you can email us at the ab41@srcity.org, and most importantly, be part of the public conversation on July 26th of this year before the City Council, and check it out there on our webpage. but I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of that and knew how to access that information. Secondly, just a brief update on our In Response, our mental health support team. We did a community meeting last month. We were really excited to have a large community turnout. We had 134 members of the community who participated in our community update. And the brief updates is that for the first 3 months of the year, our team, the van, went out to 487 calls in our community, focusing on mental health, substance abuse, and homelessness. And our system navigators, which are providing the behind-the-scenes wraparound support services, made contact with 601 times they went out and provided services to community members. And then now our big progress has been on launching the second team so we can expand our hours to 15 hours a day. And we've been working through our biggest hurdle right now is getting the mental health clinicians from the County of Sonoma. They've had certainly some difficulties with hiring and staffing those positions, but we have a verbal agreement from the county to be able to have 2 additional mental health clinicians assigned to our team no later than August 15th of this year. So we already have our single role medics hired and ready. They're finishing up the process to hire. Catholic Charities will provide our homeless outreach specialists. So as soon as the county is able to provide us the mental health clinicians, we'll launch our second team. And our goal was to get it done before the new school year starts in August of this year, so we can be more involved in working with our local schools and have the In Response team responding to calls on the school campuses involving mental health or substance abuse, as opposed to a police officer responding to those calls. So those are 2 quick updates on 2 items that are proceeding forward at the police department.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you so much, Chief Cregan. Does the subcommittee have any questions of the chief? Seeing none, is there any pre-recorded public comment on the chief's update?
We have no pre-recorded public comments.
And seeing no one in the chambers raising to make public comment, we will move on to item 5.2, review of the Vicious Dog Ordinance. The City Attorney's Office will now provide us with a review of the Vicious Dog Ordinance and discuss possible updates to the ordinance. A supervisor from Sonoma County Animal Control will discuss the services that they provide through the City of Santa Rosa. Public Works will be available for any questions regarding the city contract. We will be seeking feedback from you, the public, regarding potential changes to the ordinance. So now I will introduce, will it be Mr. Abel?
Yes, good morning, Councilmember Fleming and the other council members. I am going to start off this PowerPoint by giving you a general history and overview of the city's potentially dangerous and vicious dog ordinance. So with that, if we could turn to the first slide. So as background, it is the California Food and Ag Code, specifically Chapter 9, that provides cities and counties with a framework how to deal with dangerous dogs in the community. Specifically, Chapter 9 of the Food and Ag Code was adopted and codified into law in 1989 because of a significant escalation of dog attacks throughout the state against humans and domestic animals. And the seminal purpose behind these food and ag statutes were to address the failure of dog owners to properly confine and control their animals. Next slide, please. These statutes define what is the legal definition of a potentially dangerous or a vicious dog. The statutes address the disposition of these dogs once they have the potentially dangerous or vicious designation. They provide a model provision for municipalities to follow, and they permit a city to adopt its own program for the control of potentially dangerous and vicious dogs that may incorporate all, part, or none of this chapter, depending on what a given jurisdiction is dealing with as it relates to dog attacks. As a result of the adoption of the Food and Ag statutes in 2006, our city adopted our own like ordinance in which we incorporated Chapter 9 of the Food and Ag Code by reference. Generally speaking, our ordinance mirrors very closely what the Food and Ag Code has adopted. There's some minor changes, but generally speaking, ours is a carbon copy of what the Food and Ag Code has adopted. Next slide, please. So under our code, a vicious dog is defined as an attack that inflicts severe injury on or kills a human being. And when we talk about severe injury, our code, as well as the Food and Ag Code, defines what a severe injury is. And generally speaking, we're talking about an injury that's more than the break of the skin or a surface wound. So when I get one of these cases, the first thing I look at is what are the injuries? And generally speaking, a serious injury would be where the bite or bites are so severe and deep that they result in multiple stitches or sutures, and in many cases, resultant reconstructive surgery, cosmetic surgery, etc. Also under our code, a vicious dog would be a dog that previously was defined or designated as potentially dangerous. And after that designation was attached to the dog, that dog continues the same aggressive behavior or subsequently gets loose from its owner's property. Next slide. Under our city code, similar to the Food and Ag Code, a potentially dangerous dog is a bite to a human that is less than severe. So again, it would be a bite that breaks the skin. It's a flesh wound, but is not severe enough that it results in stitches, sutures, or something more significant than that. Similarly, an attack that occurs off the property of its owner that kills or inflicts injury upon another domestic animal. That would also rise to the level of a potentially dangerous dog. Interestingly enough, this is one area where our code differs from the Food and Ag Code. Under our code, it takes one bite of a dog versus another domestic animal to rise to potentially dangerous. Under the Food and Ag Code, the state requires 2 bites of a dog against another domestic animal before it would rise to the level of potentially dangerous. Finally, under our code, similar to the state code, when a dog is off property within a 36-month period, if there are reports of 2 or more individuals that had to take defensive actions to avoid potentially being attacked by a given dog, that too would rise to the level of potentially dangerous. Next slide. So while I anticipate that many proposed amendments will likely be discussed this morning, I limited this slide to one major amendment based upon my almost 7 years of experience in trying several dozen of these cases to verdict. So in every one of these cases, I always meet with the victim, and I can only talk about my personal experience. I have yet to have a victim who was personally attacked by a dog where they expressed concerns to me that they didn't think that our ordinance went far enough in a dog versus human attack. Instead, all of the complaints and feedback I have received over the years have been from victims who have lost a beloved pet at the hands of an aggressive dog. And so based upon the concerns that have been expressed to me over the years, I've proposed giving the city attorney's office, specifically myself, discretion to seek a vicious designation on a dog that, when unprovoked and when off the property of its owner, kills 1 or more domestic animals. Next slide. With this proposed amendment, I felt compelled to at least provide you with what I perceive to be the pros and cons of the above referenced amendment. And so let me start with the pros. So if I had the discretion to go vicious in a given case, taking a hypothetical where a dog kills another dog. It will give animal services, with my input, more legitimacy in seizing and impounding the aggressive dog pending the outcome of the hearing in the interest of public safety. And let me explain why. Admittedly, under our code right now, if in my hypothetical situation, an aggressive dog got loose and killed another dog, though the county animal services has the ability to seize that dog pending the outcome of the hearing, frankly, I don't think it would likely pass legal scrutiny. And the reason I say that is there is no situation under our city code or under the Food and Ag Code whereby a potentially dangerous dog would not be returned to its rightful owner. And so in the hypothetical situation I gave, if the county, with my input, seized an aggressive dog that had killed another dog, and the aggressive dog owner retained counsel, and that attorney filed a pretrial motion demanding the return of his client's dog to him prior to the outcome of the hearing, I would be hard pressed to argue against that, because again, there is no situation whereby a potentially dangerous dog would not be returned to the owner. So even if I prevailed at the time of trial and I got the potentially dangerous designation, that dog would be immediately returned to the dog owner. So it's hard to argue legitimately that the county can take custody temporarily of a potentially dangerous dog. However, if I had the ability to go vicious, because in at least 50% of the cases, a vicious dog is never returned to the property owner. If in my hypothetical situation, the county were to seize a dog that killed another dog, we legitimately could hold on to that dog in the interest of public safety pending the outcome of the hearing, knowing that if I got the vicious designation, there's in all likelihood that dog would not be returned to the property owner. Another pro is that when I say on this slide that it would provide the city attorney with an enforcement tool more commensurate with the magnitude of the victim's loss, what I'm talking about is that in my experience in meeting with victims who have lost a beloved pet at the hands of an aggressive dog, I've seen firsthand the pain and sadness that these folks have experienced. And I've heard repeatedly, while I'm never going to get my animal back, I want some sort of justice for the loss of my pet. And under our code and under the state code, we could not go above potentially dangerous. And in such a case, that dog goes immediately back to the dog owner. So if I have the ability to go vicious in a case like this, it's really more commensurate with the loss that the victim has experienced when losing a pet. Finally, I also put in the pro category by giving me the authority to go vicious in a case where a dog kills another domestic animal. It may minimize future attacks. And I'll give you some examples. In my experience, quite often when an aggressive dog owner recognizes that more than likely the court is going to grant my request to put a vicious tag on that animal, the dog owner doesn't want the stigma of having owning a vicious dog. And so quite often they'll either try to turn the dog over to a sanctuary, or they'll simply turn over custody of the dog to the county. Obviously, if that dog is turned over to the county, that dog will never get loose again, and it's a public safety win for everybody. Additionally, under a vicious designation, one of the requirements that dog owner is required to have, assuming the dog is not euthanized, is they're required to obtain a $500,000 insurance policy just in case the dog gets loose again and attacks somebody. the victim would then have the right to seek monetary recourse against the dog owner. In many of these situations, the dog owner is not able to acquire the $500,000 insurance policy, in which case, again, the dog owner would end up turning over custody of the dog to the county. Once again, it's a win-win, and that it's a public safety victory for everybody because that dog will not be loose again. Next slide. So what are the cons as I see them? Often laws and statutes are adopted or amended for deterrent purposes. And in my experience in litigating and trying these cases over 7 years, whether we strengthen the ordinance or not, I do not expect, if we do strengthen our ordinance, it to deter negligent dog ownership. And I say that regrettably, but in my experience, most of these individuals that have these aggressive dogs that get loose and cause injury either to a person or to another animal, they're not aware of what, they're not even aware that we have an ordinance that deals with aggressive dogs. Other cases I've dealt with, they simply don't care, which is the nature of why their dogs get loose in the first place. And so I don't think it's a deterrent necessarily, but that's not to say there's not many good reasons to strengthen our ordinance. The other issue here where I put into the con category is that the disposition of a vicious dog is at the discretion of the court. And in my personal experience, and I have tried 36 or more of these cases to verdict, more and more I'm seeing that the courts do not want to euthanize the aggressive dog except in the most egregious cases where public safety is irrefutable. So, I mean, I get cases where the injuries are so bad, it's a no-brainer for the court. There's no way the court's going to allow that dog to be released to the public just because of the damage that that dog has already done. But again, the courts are looking for a compromise, not to make everybody in the courtroom happy, but unless it's the most egregious cases, in my experience, even if I recommend a euthanasia of the aggressor dog, the court's looking for a way out to spare the life of the dog, if at all possible. So my point is that even if we strengthen the ordinance and I go into court and recommend, number one, a vicious designation, number two, that the dog be humanely euthanized, at the end of the day, the victim and any interested and impacted neighbors may not get the justice that they desire. Of course, if we don't make the amendment and don't raise an animal killing another animal to potentially going vicious, they can never get the justice they seek anyway. So anyway, those are just a couple of the pros and the cons of the one amendment that I have proposed. And with that, I think that's the end of my slides, and I will turn it over to the next presenter.
We'll turn it over to our operations manager, Ryan Whipple, and Supervisor Kevin Davis from Sonoma County Animal Services.
Good morning, council members. Thanks for having us here today. We appreciate you having the time for us. Animal Services, our responsibilities in the city limits of Santa Rosa, we deal with all of the lost and found animals. Stray animals running loose is really what those are. Rabies control, we deal with not only the city, but the entire county and all cities included. And a lot of the issues that pop up through rabies control actually goes hand in hand with the potentially dangerous and vicious ordinances that are out there as well. Because usually there's an animal that's bitten a person or another animal of some sort that is dealt with on that level. We also do animal cruelty investigations. As I said, potentially dangerous and vicious animals. We patrol all the city parks on a regular basis, dealing with nuisance animals. So if you have a neighbor that has a dog that barks constantly, or neighbors that aren't cleaning up after their pets and their waste, those are a few of the things that we deal with on that end. Then, of course, we're the disaster and emergency response group for animals within the city as well. which we've been doing for a number of years and are getting sadly better and better at dealing with that kind of a thing. And then, we're out in the community. We would like to attend different events, always want to be a part and just let folks know that we're here and we're here to help. Next slide, please. And then our staffing, we have a total of 28 members with 2 contractors. Our clerk or our front office folks that are kind of the first and front line and deal with the phones and in-person customers. We have 4.5 animal health technicians that deal with the behavioral aspect of animals that come through the shelter, the medical aspect, and the emotional and behavioral needs for animals while they're in the shelter as well. 6 animal care assistants that are the ones that are out and cleaning and feeding in the daily husbandry. 10 animal control officers that are here for the entire county in our jurisdiction, which is the unincorporated area of the county, as well as the city limits of Santa Rosa. And 2 admin aides, an analyst that just came on board, and then our myself as the operations manager, and we have a veterinarian that's here 5 days a week for 6 hours a day that does a wide range of veterinary services, whether it's spay neuter or if an animal comes in that's been hit by a car or may need to have a leg amputated, whatever it might be. Those are some of the pieces that we do here on a pretty regular basis. And also a social media consultant, because the animal welfare world nowadays, everything revolves around social media, and it's a big platform for us. Our normal hours of operation, the shelter operates from 9 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Tuesday through Saturday. Our field officers are out in the field currently from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., and that's Sunday through Saturday. In any day during the week, there is 2 officers that are assigned to the city limits of Santa Rosa for response during those normal business hours. And then we have on-call officers. There's 2 officers that are on duty overnight. One is assigned to the city and one is assigned to the unincorporated area of the county. Our dispatch is normal hours, that we actually Monday through Saturday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. That's our main office for dispatch. Anything after hours would go through the police department's dispatch center. Our after hours response time to scene can vary. Our officers do live all over the county. We could have a call in Sea Ranch and our officer lives in Petaluma that night. That's a tough one to get to. Or in certain cases, they live within the city limits and their response time is much quicker. Next slide, please. All the potentially dangerous and vicious requirements, Adam touched on this a little bit in his presentation. We make sure that the animals are licensed and vaccinated. There is a fee to be able to keep and maintain a vicious or a potentially dangerous animal. And you can see that it's $148 for a potentially dangerous and a $371 fee for vicious animals. They must be kept indoors in a secure enclosure. Secure enclosure can be a fenced-in yard that is solid and that doesn't have any break points. A lot of times we work with the owners on these cases where they may have a weak point in the fence, or they have kids that left the gate open to the fence. Some of the things we suggest is, obviously shoring up the fence, but we also say, hey, put a spring on that gate so it closes automatically and doesn't just remain open for your dogs to get out. So there's a lot of education that happens while we're in the field as well, not just on the potentially dangerous or vicious cases. If the dog does go off the property, it does have to be on an approved collar and leash and wearing a muzzle. We do provide the collar and leash. The owners do have to find their own muzzle. There is also a sign that needs to be posted, and it does need to be in a conspicuous place for people to see, and it has to be facing the street. The animal must also be microchipped and spayed or neutered before returning to the owner. And then for a vicious animal, it's all the same requirements, plus, as Adam mentioned, the $500,000 liability insurance for that animal to be there. And there is no, those vicious animals cannot live on the same property where minor children are present or reside. Just so the potentially dangerous is only for a 3-year time, as long as there's no issues in between during that the date of the designation to the end of the 3-year term, that potentially dangerous does come off of their record essentially. And then the vicious is for the lifetime of the animal, whether it's given away or changes, ownership, or even if you change a location, that moniker is going to follow that animal. Next slide. When a dog bites a person or domestic animal, these are a lot of the stuff that I believe Adam's kind of covered already, but this is some of the hard pieces for us on our enforcement side, is really investigating all the way down through on the history of the animal. Have we dealt with it? Interviewing neighbors. There's a lot of time that is spent in countless hours really to track down people and make sure we get their statements, be sure we get photos of injuries. And then, once it does get into Adam's hand, there's a lot of time that it takes from that point on also to be able to work with the victims, work with the dog owner, and follow up on any other pieces that may be necessary. It doesn't really matter which type it is, whether it's potentially or vicious. We put a lot of time in tracking down this information to make sure we're doing it right and keeping things on the level with what needs to go into that investigation. And as we mentioned, the animal can be seized under the city code. Potentially dangerous owners, they are given the opportunity to voluntarily designate, which means they can sign a piece of paper that does say that we agree to declare our animal potentially dangerous. When that happens, it doesn't usually make it into Adam's hands. It's one that stays between us and the owner, but it doesn't change the designation for that time period at all. Or it goes to the Superior Court through Adam and being filed that direction. And as Adam mentioned, in a vicious case, we at times do seek euthanasia because we do feel that there's a threat to public safety at that point. And the owners, if they can't comply with the stipulations that come along with that, then we would be able to have to, seize that animal and move on from there with euthanasia. And if they are able to meet all those requirements from time to time, where they do have to have that insurance and that secure enclosure, they can voluntarily agree to that. But as I mentioned as well, sometimes we get into the courts and things go a different direction. Next slide, please. Excuse me. The most of the time in these cases, the animal is here the entire time this is going through the court system once we've seized them. There's times where some of these cases have gone for over a year that these animals are still in our custody. And because they are either, more than likely seeking a vicious declaration, they're not an animal that we can handle because they've gone through, different issues and have problems. So we do our best with, doing what we can to keep the animal's behavioral and mental stability going. But it does take a toll on the animal because it is a long time that they can be in our facility. And it's a stressful place. There's a lot of animals, a lot of smells that does stress animals out pretty often. And as I mentioned, our investigations, those countless hours that go into it, one that you may have remembered that also made the paper where it was an Anthony Baca vicious case where the dog was already deemed potentially dangerous at one point for killing another animal. And then it actually jumped out of a car window and attacked and killed another small animal on the street. That case alone, was well over 200, 300 hours that our officers had put into this investigation. There were multiple court dates that had to be met and appeal after appeal. So these just dragged on for quite a long time. And again, catching up with those folks that are involved can be a challenge, but we definitely put the time into it and make sure we get everything we need to. Next slide, but I think that may be it for me.
So next we'll introduce Joey Hinowitz from Public Works, and Joey's very familiar with the contract, and the contract is held in the Public Works Department. So I'll turn it over to Joey.
Great, thank you, Chief, and council members. I'm here just to provide a little bit of a history and a brief overview of the contract that the City of Santa Rosa maintains with the County of Sonoma to provide animal services and animal regulation. In August 2000, the Santa Rosa City Council approved a resolution to approve the agreement that we're currently under with the County of Sonoma for not only the construction of and expansion of the animal services facilities, but also the animal regulation and sheltering agreement. This term was to be for 30 years. So with it being signed in 2000, we currently still have close to over about 7 years left under this current agreement with the county for these animal services. Some of the highlights of the animal services contract is the Santa Rosa expects the same level of service and utilization of animal capacity that the county provides for its county animals and sheltering as they provide for the city of Santa Rosa, as well as we do expect that the Animal Services does enforce our city animal ordinance, which has been discussed tonight, and as well as the approved fee schedule, which is approved by the city council. Next slide. So some of the questions that come up in regards to this agreement is, what are the costs? How much is the city paying for these services? So approximately it's about $2 million on an annual basis. Over the past 5-year average, you see that figure there. It's just under 2 million, 1.8 million there. What do these costs pay for? So the city cost is the allocated operating expense, and the operating expenses that go into that from the county are, salaries, services, supplies, equipment, repairs and maintenance, utility expenses, insurance expenses, building replacement reserve, as well as a share of the administrative operating and overhead expense through health services, the health services department at the County of Sonoma. We do get some credits for city fees and penalties. This is mostly going to be animal licenses and late license fees that come from the city of Santa Rosa. And so we essentially are just going to be paying a share of this operating expense based on the percentage of calls that come in from the city. Right now, we average of the total calls that come in for animal services, the city of Santa Rosa calls specifically average anywhere from about 35 to 45% of those calls, generally probably closer to that 40% range. So 40% of those calls are being, coming from within the city of Santa Rosa city limits. Next slide. Now, these were the words directly taken from the contract that was written in 2000. But as you see here, not much has changed. The county staff will consist of 28.5 FTEs. Any staffing changes that are expected will be communicated with the city, and Brian and his team have done a good job of keeping me up to date with any changes that are happening. Some of the closures and or shorter hours that occurred during COVID, he communicated those with me as well. The county is to provide field services within the boundaries of Santa Rosa, like I mentioned, consistent with what they provide in the county. You see the routine service hours there, and as well as the emergency, holiday, or after hours. Anything that's not considered routine would be outside of those routine service hours. Within the contract, it does say that emergencies will receive a response normally no longer than 45 minutes, but as mentioned before, sometimes that 45-minute response time is not to be able to be achieved. It's usually maybe a short time after that. Next slide. One of the other questions that came up is, what are other jurisdictions, what are other, counties, cities doing as far as animal services? So I did do a brief environmental scan of some of the other jurisdictions in California. Currently, what we have right now is the county provides these animal services. That is the status quo that we have currently within Santa Rosa and Sonoma County for our jurisdiction. Some of the other opportunities that I did see, or other options that I did see for other jurisdictions, is some jurisdictions do have a public-private nonprofit partnership. For example, I know that the city of Petaluma contracts with North Bay Animal Services. That is a nonprofit animal services provider. One of the other options that generally isn't seen very often, but it is another option that I found, is a joint powers authority. So like any other joint powers authority, the jurisdictions within a certain area or county can come together, and they can, essentially come together to provide those animal services for whatever jurisdictions would be willing to sign on to that. One of the benefits that I found with that one is it does give those jurisdictions a little bit more insight and day-to-day handling of the administration and a policy, but it was probably one of the models that was rarely used when I did my research. One of the other options is that the city could decide that, we would like to take over animal services program on our own. The city could decide to institute an animal services program run by city staff. That is definitely another option with that as well to be considered. Within the agreement itself, we do have that 10 years left, about 8 years left under the current agreement. If the city decided that they wanted to go this route or consider to provide a city-delivered program, it is stated within the contract that we do need to give at least a 5-year minimum FYI to the county that we would be looking into that. So the soonest we'd be able to potentially even institute that would be 5 years from the point that we give that notice to the county. So those are all the different models that I was able to find within California and some of the other jurisdictions, just to kind of give you an option there. And I believe that concludes my part of the presentation. And we're open for any questions.
Thank you very much to everybody who presented today. I'll start by taking questions from the subcommittee. Council members Schwedhelm or Rogers?
I don't have any questions.
Okay, thank you. I do have a few questions. And I think that this may be mostly around the contract piece of this. I think it's pretty well laid out what the city attorney would like. I do have some concerns around response time, and I'm wondering if there's any provisions in the contract that the city holds with the county about a maximum response time to a call.
There is no specific language that speaks to maximum response times in the current agreement now.
Okay. And then also you mentioned that the county agrees to uphold the city ordinance. Is that flexible? Is it the ordinance as written at the time of the initiation of the contract, or is that any ordinance that the city pursues and implements?
I mean, this might potentially get into Adam's world, but the way that I interpret it is, if the city council was to update or change our animal ordinance, then the county would be obligated to enforce under that change of those agreements.
Okay, and then finally, is there any opportunity to make tweaks, not to pull out of the contract, but to make tweaks to the contract prior to 2030?
I believe there would be. It would have to be, something that we bring forward to the county, and the county would also need to agree to those changes. But I definitely think those are discussions that we could definitely have and explore.
Thank you very much. Now we will open it up for public comment on this item. If you're in the chambers, please approach the podium and introduce yourself if you so choose. You'll have 3 minutes, and our clerk will put a timer up for you.
It's time to adjust the code to protect all domestic animals considered as family members, not just dogs. Procedures need to change at Sonoma County Animal Control. They certainly do not make it easy for the victims to gather data. Their reports can show bias, and the posting requirements of where dangerous dogs reside is lousy, insufficient, and does not alert passersby. In the case of these dogs, a person had to be standing at their front door to read the warnings. Any changes that you can make to the code that are victim-based and recognize other domestic animals would be of great service to our city. Remember, owning a dog is a privilege and a responsibility that includes keeping all members of our community safe. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. My name is Alan Butler. Our pet Belle was the first animal killed on February 18th, and I have to second what Matt had to say, and I think you've received a lot of written comments in the ensuing months since that happened. I learned a lot today from the presentation by the city attorney and the county that I wasn't aware of. And it's a very complex soup of regulations and enforcement. I agree with everyone that it needs to be more robust. A couple of issues kind of beyond the vicious designations would be the question of whether there is adequate staffing at this point. It took an hour and a quarter or more for the animal control officer to get from Sonoma area to Santa Rosa. I believe that was during normal operation hours, and I think that Brian Whipple told me previously that there are a number of unfunded officer positions at this point. So making sure that things are adequately staffed is really important. The second is that all the animal control ordinances in the various cities and in the county are consistent so that animal control officers have one set of guidelines to implement, and this often comes during very traumatic situations like we witnessed, and I want to make sure that the officers and everyone involved knows what's going on. I think that Adam Abel has a good handle on what needs to be done, and I think that gives a high degree of flexibility in terms of being able to ramp up the designations for vicious animals. One question would be, would every city attorney have the same outlook in terms of what needed to be done in that case? So I think there's a lot I still need to learn, but I really do urge that nobody else has to go through this again. It was an extremely traumatic situation. Watching my cat be decapitated in my backyard, the dog ran into my house at one point. It's something that still lingers. It's the reason my wife isn't here today. She doesn't want to keep reliving this. And I would thank you for anything you could do to make enforcement more robust. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else in the chambers wishing to make a comment or share any questions? Okay. Madam City Clerk, do we have any pre-recorded public comment?
We have no pre-recorded public comments.
I see another person. Sir, unfortunately, due to Brown Act requirements, we cannot have two public comments made by the same individual. However, if you'd like to share your concerns with another member of the public, and they can approach the podium. I'm sorry for the inconvenience.
Can I ask a question? You mentioned
that'll be at the discretion of the clerk. That's above my discretion. Typically, sir, we cannot, per state law, allow more than one public comment. If you want to take a moment to ask someone else, I would love to hear what you have to say.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Beth Yerota Steffi, and I'm asking a question for Brian Whipple. Does he feel like they are, am I on? Can you hear me?
Now we can. Thank you, Beth.
Okay, sorry. The question is, does Brian Whipple feel like he is adequately staffed? Are there enough animal control officers? And are the ordinances consistent throughout the jurisdiction? So I assume that's countywide.
Thank you so much, and I apologize for the hiccup in the rules.
No problem.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I've got that right. Are the county staff adequately staffed, and are the ordinances consistent across the jurisdictions? All right, thank you very much. So with that, we will close public comment, and I will ask our staff to answer some of your questions as well as other thoughts. So the first question is of Mr. Whipple. What is your perception of staffing, and do you believe that your office is adequately staffed?
Well, I can say that in 2013, when I came to Sonoma County and came on board here, we were allotted 13 officers at the time. Currently, our FTE has dropped since then, down to 10. So, covering the jurisdiction that we have, it can make it on a 24-hour basis. Personally, I feel that we do need more officers to be able to respond to the needs of the community.
And has that change in staffing levels impacted your response times, in particular after hours?
Not necessarily. Again, our officers, live all over the county. The number of officers hasn't changed in terms of who the numbers that are on call overnight.
Okay. Has the staffing reduction impacted your response times during regular hours?
I would say in certain aspects, yes. When you're dealing with somebody being injured, out sick, on vacation, your numbers drop. So it does sometimes provide a challenge to be on scene as quick as possible. But again, for city limits, we always have at least 2 officers that are inside city limits and can get around pretty quickly.
Okay, so even though there's been staffing changes during business hours, you do have 2 officers in the city limits at all times?
Correct.
Okay, thank you for that answer. And the second question is maybe for Mr. Hinowitz or Mr. Whipple, which is, are the ordinances across the 9 jurisdictions and the county of Sonoma all uniform, or do they vary?
I can take that one. They do vary from the unincorporated area in terms of in some within the city. They're very similar, but there is some slight differences between ordinances.
Is there anything notable? Any notable differences?
Not really. I mean, I want to say that some of the wording might be a little bit different. One that is significant in my mind is actually under the nuisance section, where it does take 3 complaints from neighbors within one area around a certain location for us to be able to move forward on a nuisance complaint within the city limits. Within the county, it only takes 2 for us to be able to move any action forward.
And is that nuisance number, is that consistent with the food and ag code to be 2 or to be 3, or does the ag code vary from that number?
Kevin Davis might have a better answer on that one.
Yeah, under the food, there's nothing underneath the food and ag code as far as the public nuisance sections go. They're actually listed underneath the California Penal Code, and they are quite different from the city code to the county code to the state penal code.
Thank you very much. I don't have any other questions at this time. I think that where we're going with this is that we're going to now bring it back to the subcommittee for thoughts or questions and recommendations about what you think we should do and where you think we should go with it. And I will take the chair's prerogative and just start out by thanking everybody who came here today and letting you know how sincerely sorry I am for the difficult experiences that you've had. It is going to be my personal recommendation that we bring this to the City Council with the recommendations from our City Attorney's Office, that we change to the discretion that the City Attorney's Office has the ability to pursue a vicious designation if an animal attacks a domestic animal off the property after. And I am interested to know from my fellow committee members if they think that we need to address the frequency of times that an animal needs to attack either a person or another animal, to reduce it to one time if it's particularly vicious against a human or an animal, rather than two. And again, this wouldn't require that the city attorney goes for the vicious designation, but just that they have the discretion, another tool in their toolbox to keep us and our pets safe. And with that, I will call upon Councilmember Schwedhelm to get your thoughts.
Great, thank you. And I really appreciate all the presentations today. It was very informative. So for me, I'm definitely supportive of the proposed amendment to strengthen the city ordinance that was described on slide 6. The sooner we can do that, I think the better for all. I am also comfortable keeping in the same relationship with the city contracting with Sonoma County Animal Services. Regarding the number of calls, 2 complaints I'd be more supportive of than our current 3. But again, I'd like to also hear what the impacts that decision may have on the actual operations. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Schwedhelm. Councilmember Rogers.
Thank you, Chair. So I did have a couple of questions. Is it that the FTE that is allocated changed from 2013 to now? Is that the reason why the number has gone down, or is it because you cannot fill FTEs?
There was reductions in staffing over the years due to budgetary issues.
Thank you. And then I also wanted to know, out of curiosity, and I apologize, my brain, when there is an investigation and there is an animal that stays for a year, who is fiscally responsible for that animal staying at your facility for a year? Is that is the owner billed for that, or who's responsible for like feeding and grooming and all those?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, any animal that's in our care, we are going to provide all of the needed basics of shelter, food, water, general husbandry. When these do take an extended amount of time to be heard in court, it all depends. We do at times ask for restitution and also for sending invoices to the owner. But I would say probably maybe 5 out of 10 times we actually see the money that comes back from the boarding and care, because those bills can really rack up fairly quickly. If the animal, after that year-long wait is deemed vicious and euthanasia is the next step, we still would send an invoice, but it doesn't mean that we're going to get paid.
Okay, thank you. And I did want to take the time before I give my response for the proposal. I wanted to take the time just to let anyone know that has lost a family member. Some would call them pets, and I hear other people refer as family members because I believe that they are. I am sincerely sorry for your loss and for anything that you have gone through. That should never happen. And I'm sorry that you had to go through that. And for the people that are in the chambers, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that your wife could not be here today because of the trauma that she had endured for what had happened. And anyone that is listening that has gone through something, I am sincerely sorry for everything that you have gone through. I've seen something like that happen, and it is very, very scary when you don't have control, because animals have an instinction, and they have, you know, and they're, you can't stop them. So I'm truly sorry. But I do recommend that we bring this to the full council as the proposed amendment to strengthen the city ordinance. I think that we need to give the city attorney some discretion in how they move forward in order to keep our community safe and to keep our family safe. And to me, it all boils down to safety. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rogers. I see that Councilmember Schwedhelm has your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I forgot to ask one additional question that I had for Brian. Do you guys have bilingual staff?
Yes, we do. All of our front office folks are bilingual. It's been a struggle to find bilingual for the officers, but we do have some that have the basics down for communication on that end.
Could you be a little bit more specific? If I heard, you know, I'm talking more of the people out in the field, in other words, that respond to these, because we have a large segment of our population speaks other languages, and just interested in how you are able to respond to those type of calls.
With two options that we use, there's a translation service that an officer can call in and get some assistance there. A lot of times they will call it back into the office and speak to one of our bilingual clerks that work in the front office and be able to communicate, you know, any direction or needs through them.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you, council members. One last thing that I think would be helpful, I don't think it's a today thing, but I think it's a future thing for Mr. Hinowitz and Mr. Whipple to consider, would be getting, as we go forward in preparing for the 2030 amendment of the contract, to begin discussing a maximum response time in the city of Santa Rosa after 24 hour at the overnight time, so that we can make sure that we have some coverage, some responsive and rather quick coverage after hours. I'm glad we have minimum staffing levels during the day, but oftentimes these things do occur overnight. I want to thank the staff for your thoughtful and detailed presentations, as well as the immense amount of outreach that you, especially the city attorney's office, conducted with the residents of the city of Santa Rosa. And thank the residents of the city of Santa Rosa and the Grace neighborhood for participating in a process that will likely lead to improvements for you as well as people all across our beautiful city. A heartfelt thank you. With that, we will move on to item 6, future topics. Does anybody on the subcommittee have anything that they would like to see come forward at future meetings of this Public Safety Subcommittee? Are there any members of the public or pre-recorded comments on item 6?
We have no pre-recorded public comments.
With that, we will adjourn this meeting of the Public Safety Subcommittee. Thank you for your time.